Hey,
Hi.
welcome. Welcome to What Could Go Wrong live on a Wednesday afternoon. This is new for us, but it's a really special week because my buddy here is writing a book about how we're going to change the world, and it's really important. So I'm going to let her introduce herself because she's always better. You guys are always better at introducing yourselves than I am. So I'm going to let you run with that, and then we're just going to jump into this whole how we're changing the world situation.
There we go. Well, thanks, Chelsea, for the great introduction. I will definitely say, if people don't know, I actually met Chelsea because I interviewed her for my book. So that is actually how we know each other.
That's true.
But yeah, I'm Komal, and I was an educator for 5 years. I did Teach for America and taught sixth and seventh grade math up in Richmond, California. And as many teachers experience during that time, you're trying to do good for kids, but a lot of times it doesn't feel like that. So
Yeah.
I think over a span of 5 years, I became the teacher that was always excited about my kids and what they were doing. But then by the fifth year was trying to change things in the classroom to make it more about them and humanizing and all the things that I knew they were capable of. So that's really where my journey started. I was like, I want a bigger impact. So I'm crazy enough to go to business school and applied to USC, got in, and did 2 years there, which was really interesting, I think, getting a business degree after being in education, because I think you have a different lens. And now I'm
Yeah.
writing a book, which is super casual. Um,
It's totally normal. It's totally normal.
and also, and I'm an educational consultant. But yeah, so my book's name is Bringing Consciousness to Education. Still may change by the time I publish it, but it's due to publish in August. And it's just about how we can shift this paradigm in education and just make it about the inner world of a child. So that's the vision, and we'll see where it goes.
We're talking about shifting education to make it about the child. You're
Yeah.
blowing my mind right now. I can't
You mean
handle what you're
children,
saying.
that children can form?
I mean, I don't understand. I don't understand. Okay, so I think we need to break it down. So the concept is bringing consciousness to education.
Yeah.
So tell me what consciousness looks like. Like, what does that even mean?
Yeah, so that's a good question because that's what I'm exploring in my book, which is hilarious enough, right? I always bring it back to my own story. So for me, when I was teaching, I definitely went through a lot of like personal development outside of teaching. Because I think when you're working with that many students every day, you're going to have to personally transform at some point and try to figure out.
Oh, for real. Yes.
So I think through that, I started tapping into my consciousness a little bit more. And we're all consciousness, but I think it was in those moments where I was just being aware. So that's kind of how I define it, is just a state of awareness. So
Mm-hmm.
through that process, at least in my personal life, I mean, I had to unlearn so much of my conditioning and programming of growing up, which was
Yeah.
not the most fun at times, to say the least.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel
Yeah.
you on that.
Yeah, but I think, in terms of why I talk about it in the schooling system, because I like to say schooling because I do think it's an institutionalized thing, is, where is the awareness? Where is the cultivation of a child's like innate gifts and them being
Mm-hmm.
conscious being and being curious and having their intuition and their awareness of life and being so just this embodied human that we just completely shut down, to be honest.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so it's just like a state of awareness, not only for the system itself, but I think it's consciousness for educators around what their role is in the system. And then ultimately the byproduct of this, that we have children who like are conscious beings in this world and adults that are thriving, right? I mean, that's the ultimate
That's
goal.
exciting.
Yeah,
Can
it's
we do that? Let's do that.
and yeah, let's do it. I think it's going to take a lot of people, but yes, I think it can happen.
I agree. I think it's going to take all the people. But I think so. You mentioned a couple interesting words that I can want to kind of keep breaking down.
Yeah.
So you talked about the concept of unlearning. Well, this
Yeah.
seems very backwards to everything that education is about. So what is unlearning? What does that even mean? what does that mean? You're using all kinds of big words, I feel
I
like.
know. I'm realizing this. This is you tapping into me writing a book where I now have like 200 pages to break it down, right? So like,
Right? Yeah, I need it in like this much.
yeah. Unlearning is a component. So when I think about learning, I think a lot of times when we talk about learning, sometimes we're learning things that don't ultimately serve us and our authentic selves. A
Mm-hmm.
lot of times what we learn in our world is based on our environment, our family and their values and belief systems. It's a lot of what's around us. And so the reason why I say that is learning can be beautiful, but it has to be
Mm-hmm.
really authentic to who you are as a human being. So then
Right.
we think about unlearning, what we're seeing many times, unfortunately, is that we have children, including myself, who like went through the system, did well, learned a lot. And then you have this
Mm-hmm.
moment when you're an adult and you go, who am I? Like,
Yeah.
what am I meant to do?
Yeah.
What impact am I making in this world, right? And so
So many questions.
so many questions. And so of course there's like the awareness component and the reflection component that even comes before unlearning. You can't unlearn
Mm-hmm.
until you figure out what you're trying to unlearn, right?
Right, right. You have to be aware of it before you can
Yeah.
unlearn. Yeah.
And then you take that moment to unlearn. So to give you a tangible example, for me, my whole life, I was told that education was based on you do well in school, you get good grades, and maybe you and I can
Mhm.
talk about what we were like as students.
Yes.
You get good grades, you go to college, you get a job, and you'll be happy. Like you're
Yep.
going to be so happy
Done.
and valued in this society. And that's what I learned. And then when I stepped into the classroom and is in front of my students, I'm going, wait, does this mantra work for every single child in this room? Probably not. And so and
Mm-hmm.
that was that moment where I went, oh my gosh, we need to take a step back. I need to take a step back. Like, what is the true purpose of education? Did the schooling that I have, was that actually expanding my potential and who I was, or was it limiting me? And so
Yeah.
it was in those moments that I started to unlearn what I had learned my entire life, what I
Mm-hmm.
thought learning and education was. I mean, that's just one
Yeah.
example, and there's so many.
Yeah. And I mean, unlearning, like this whole concept of, and I think a big word that can be applied to that is intentional. Like, what are you intaking? What are you learning? What are you applying to yourself that's intentionally focused on who you are?
Mm,
And that's such a huge thing. I mean, outside of education, in education, like everywhere. And I'm doing that now, right? In my own life is like,
yeah.
why is that belief so interestingly, this may or not relate to education, but I think it's that concept of unlearning. So I'm reading this book, and the author is talking about how her partner, when
Mhm.
she comes home, if her partner is, laying on the couch and watching TV in the middle of the day, then she immediately gets frustrated. Like, what are you doing? It's the
Mm,
middle of the day. This is not what we do, right? And she had to go back and reflect on, why is that so frustrating to me?
mm,
And had to kind of go back in and almost unlearn her response and figure out that it wasn't really about what her partner was doing. It was about how she had felt about what her partner was doing based on prior experiences, right? And had to kind of go back and unlearn. And to me, that's unlearning our responses. Because I
yeah.
think a lot of times we have responses that we don't even know why we respond that way. We just respond that way. And
Yeah.
until we say, how do we, like, why are we responding that way, and kind of backtrack that and see if it matches with our values and who we are, and really having that consciousness and awareness, we're just repeating a cycle and we don't really know why.
I love that. And it just reminds me of also the distinction between being reactionary and responsive.
Mm-hmm.
I think
Mm-hmm.
when you respond, you're taking a deep breath and going, okay, how do I want to respond to this situation?
Right.
But we kind of live in a world where most people react, and we
Yeah.
react based on our thought patterns and our mind, because our thought patterns, like this woman you talked about, if they're attaching this present moment situation to something that happened in the past, and that's how they're reacting. But that's not
Mm-hmm.
true response, because a response is individualized based on the current situation that has nothing to do what has happened before. And that's hard.
Totally. It really is. And I think That's part of bringing consciousness to education, in my opinion, is working with learners about what it looks like to build your own responses and have your own, like, these are tiny humans. Maybe not all of them are tiny. I mean, I'm early education, so mine were all tiny. But I mean, it was reminding ourselves that they're humans that need to learn and grow and have the ability to react and respond in their own way. I mean, I'm a very burn the system down person. I mean, that's just who I am, but that's who I am now. I think you and I were talking about before we started who we were when we were in school, right? So for me, believe it or not, I was the quiet kid who got all the good grades. I took all the pre-AP classes, all the honors classes. I did all the things that were listed on my little, checklist to be successful, right? And I ate by myself in the library because people, I mean, they were everywhere.
Yeah.
And I did all the things I was supposed to do. And then I got bored. And then I graduated at 14 and moved to Honduras. And that's a different story. But I mean, I did all the things that I was supposed to do. And I didn't feel like this magical sense of happiness that they said was supposed to come when I checked all those boxes. What was did you find the magical happiness inside of that?
I thought I did. For a while, right? Isn't it?
That's better. Yeah.
How we can convince ourselves. I mean, I think like for me, similar to you, great student, whatever that means, right? Within the system, I was a good student. Yes, love it. I was a good student, got really good grades, took took all the AP classes too, got into college. I was like, I made it. Like I did it. Right?
Yeah.
And then there was a point where I went, I'm a bio major and I don't like blood. So like I need to like figure myself out a little bit of what's going on. And then of course I went into education and I was like, oh, this is where I'm meant to be. Right. So it was kind of in that moment of realizing it. And then when I went through the unlearning is honestly when I started becoming more authentic to like my truth and what it really means and all of that. But honestly, you were talking about what kids need in schools and this consciousness component. I do think we really need a balance between being and doing. I think we are so emphasizing on the doing, which is like our rat race, capitalistic society.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
But if you don't allow children to just be and to just explore and play and know not only in ECE, but throughout their, throughout their education, then, maybe then they have space to explore their interest and what they really care about and what they really love instead of it constantly being about the doing.
Totally. I mean, yes. And I think that's a huge thing. And I want to ask you a question. But I was going to say, Elena said, I think many of us had to do this unlearning. Yeah. Completely true. And I think some of us are doing it willingly, while others of us are, not doing it willingly, or maybe not as intentionally, but having to, just as things kind of shift.
Yeah.
And then Jennifer says, my happiness came when I stopped checking boxes expected of me and starting checking the boxes that I wanted.
I love that.
I mean, like, build your own box. I mean, I burned down the other boxes, build your own box, and then check that box. That's my whole theory. And, that's what I do with my girls. We homeschool and their education is inquiry based. I mean, Matt Barnes, right?
Yeah.
Like, okay. Yeah. He's my jam. Like, he's the person who, when I do panic, he's like, it's fine. Your children are humans. They will be learning. Don't worry about the boxes. 'Cause I even still go, oh my gosh, I missed these 7 boxes. And, he's my person who's like, calm down. Okay. The boxes are changing. Aren't we burning down the boxes? And I'm like, I know we're burning the boxes, but sometimes they're just like ingrained in my head. And that's really hard. But I want my own personal kids. And when I was teaching, it was the same way. I want them to be able to ask questions respectfully, because I think you can respectfully challenge authority. And ask questions and build your own concept of who you are and what you're doing. I want them to be able to do that. And I want them to be able to follow their own interests and inquiries as they're learning. Bernard said perspective learning. I think that's kind of the same same concept is, are you setting aside the human for the boxes, or is it the boxes are built around the human? And what do you think?
Hmm.
Hmm.
One thing I will say is I think all of us, to your point, have to question, what is learning? What is the purpose of
That's a
education? Because
good question.
a lot of people want to change the education system, including myself, or burn it down per se, but it's like
With love,
with
with
love.
love and
But we have to ask ourselves how much of it is still us imposing what we believe learning is on kids.
right.
So
Yeah.
you can
Yeah.
sit here and say the system is wrong, but you still may be asking your kids to do, an hour of multiplication every day. And you have
Mm-hmm.
to be able to ask yourself, is that even something that's necessary? Now, it
Right.
could be, I'm not saying don't do it. What I'm saying is
Yeah.
just be more intentional about what we believe
Mm-hmm.
even is. Because sometimes I say, as human beings, we're learning all the time. All the time.
Oh, 100%. And that's well understood inside of early education.
Yes.
In early education, it's better understood. There's like some sort of magical switch that turns off when you go into kindergarten in public schools, and suddenly you can only learn in silos. I don't know what happens. It has to be something. I don't really know. But in early education, it is understood that these kiddos are learning all the time. And learning is interdisciplinary, and learning happens in every way, in all the time. And that's why I feel like that's why I loved early education, because there's so much more freedom.
Yeah.
And you're able, like Reggio Emilia is kind of what I love that concept, because it's, instead of presenting them the answer, you're presenting them the concept and allowing them to find their own answer, which I would love to see that concept kind of taken into primary and secondary education. But I think it is there some in like project-based learning. There's pieces of it inside of different theories of learning.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah, I think it's all there. I do think like there's a lot of models out there that are working and are doing good for kids, and I'm not going to sit here and say that mine is revolutionary and, is like pushing it. But the first thing that I think about, at least for me personally, is like, what does it take for a child to be a mindful, conscious adult in the future? That's what I'm really focusing on. And are we cultivating that in our schools? And now someone may say, well, that's the parent's job or the guardian's job. That's not an education job. We're here to just teach subjects. But I'm going, if a child is not being given that outside of school because of whatever their situation is at home, there should be a mediation before they go out into the world that cultivates those abilities, because they have it. Children are conscious. So it's not like you have to do anything. It's just focusing on it, and it's not sitting here and saying, well, let's do a meditation for, 5 minutes before the test. No, like that is not the purpose of this. And you're still pushing it towards a test score or standardized testing. But it's like, are you actually having an educational system that individualizes learning for a child and is really pushing them to just be authentic, exploration, curious beings who are trying to navigate life, are constantly learning, and will figure out what they want to do? I also find it really funny that, like, at least for me growing up, it was always like, oh, she loves helping people. Like, she's going to be a nurse. Or like, he builds so many great blocks, like our future engineer. And it's like,
you can do one thing. You can do one thing with that talent, and I know what it is.
And I always laugh, and I'm like, no, like the person building blocks could be an entrepreneur. Like the girl who's helping people could be planting trees in the Amazon. Like, you don't know.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's a huge, like, one thing that I go back to all the time, and I can't remember who said it, and I'm going to find it, but I was reading a post, and I've quoted it a couple times now, and it talks about the future of the future of education is, we don't know the future of education. And I think that, and you and I have had this conversation before, because it's not about saying here's the path, walk in it, do exactly these things. It's about asking questions and then following the learner, because they're the ones who are going to be in this future doing the things that they're doing, not us. And so I talk a lot about the ego of the educator, right? How are we setting aside the ego of the educator? Because we are no longer, we never really were, but we are no longer the end all be all. Like, we don't hold all the information. And we don't have all the answers to the questions, and we're not saying this is exactly what needs to look. We shouldn't be, right?
Yeah.
So how are we setting aside our ego and then co-constructing alongside the learner to create the future of education, rather than saying, this is the future of education, go and do that? Because if we do that, we're just repeating the same problem that we're trying to come out of. And then it's just like, what are we doing?
Well, I love that you said that, because first of all, I think people need to be aware of ego. I think a lot of people don't even realize that a lot of times we're operating from our ego, and we don't even know
Right.
what we are. And what does ego want? It wants to feel safe.
Yeah.
It wants to feel in control. That's what it wants. Anything out, any uncertainty or anything out of that is scary. And that's not a situation you want to be in. So for example, if, we have expectations of someone and they don't, fulfill them, well, of course they won't, because that was your ego. It was trying to control the situation that you had no control over in the first place.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I love that. I mean, I do think a lot about, we don't have to have all the answers. And actually in my book, I talk about in the end, what we really need is we need self-awareness. We need to shift our mindsets. We need to unlearn ourselves. I think a lot of times we hear people say we need to shift the system. If we don't shift our own consciousness and become aware of ourselves, people make up systems, right? Yeah. So it's kind of like, if you want that to change, well, then we ourselves have to become self-aware and understand, how are we perpetuating a system? Even if we think that we're not, we still may be. Which what you said, you're like, oh my God, those 7 boxes for my kids, like I still have that. Like, that's crazy.
Yeah. Right? And I'm so anti-box, and I still get stuck in these boxes, because they're just there. But I think you're so right, is if we as educators are not going into the future of education with this consciousness, then we're just going to repeat the same thing over again. Yeah. Like, it's not about us finding the answers and giving them again. It's about coming alongside the learners and helping them find them. And I think that is the huge difference. Is it's not about creating another system, because it's just not sustainable. I mean, we have to create something that has this sustainability. And I think, in my own opinion, like, these are all my personal opinions, right? Yeah. Is that means we're coming alongside the learner, because they're the ones who are going to be in the future. I just don't understand why we would create what that future is going to be for them and tell them what it's going to look like when we really have no idea.
Yeah. And, I love you say that, because I do want to take a moment and empathize with educators, because we're put in a system that doesn't value us or appreciate us. And also we're put in a system, at least I was, where I was kind of taught that I was the martyr of my classroom, that I was somehow save the day and help all the kids. And so what happened is that I wanted control, because I'm getting validated for that. So
for sure.
It's good to be in the front and kids are looking at me and I'm kind of like, hello, I'm here to deliver the lesson. And that's not how I went about it every day, but that's what it was. And funny enough, to what you said, my 5th year, I did have to address my ego and go, Komal, like, this is not about you. So I was the teacher in the back. Like, my kids were running the show. And I didn't need a Miss Shaw, you're my favorite teacher, because it didn't matter. That doesn't matter. I don't care. What I care about, are you feeling empowered to do what you need to do? And I still, to be fair, I was still in the confines of a school, or, a traditional school, where it was about standard lessons. So I had to do what I could in what I had. But I definitely had to take a step back and go, like, this is not about me. And it's interesting, because I do think parents probably struggle with this as well, right? It's like, and you could probably speak to this more, but you're having kids and you're like, okay, my value in society is how I raise my children. But when we do that, we don't even unconsciously realize how we may be stifling them, because we want them to kind of fit the box. Come on, fit the box,
Yeah.
because then what's gonna happen if you don't, But it's like, what is the repercussions of that for your child in the long
Mm-hmm.
run? And if you truly
Mm-hmm.
want them to be happy, guess what? A lot of times when a child wants to be happy, it doesn't always go the way we want it to be. Not usually our expectations.
No, not once, not ever. Like, never does that happen. I just don't. Yeah. And I mean, so to empathize with parents, I mean, you empathize with educators, which I agree. And I think what you had said about, you know, you were finding value or you were being given value in what you were doing is what's encouraged gets repeated. So if educators are finding their value in, being able to present these lessons and teach these things and all those types of, right, presenting from the front, leading from the front instead of leading from the side, then that's what's going to be repeated.
Totally.
I mean, so what's encouraged gets repeated, and that can be very challenging. But for parents, it's the same thing. I mean, even for me, I've been doing this a while. My background is child development. I've taught in schools. I know the things. I know the things, like they're in my head somewhere, right? I know the things. I know the people. We talk about the things all the time. But even with my own kids, it's scary. It is, because there's, we have dyslexia, ADHD, right? And it's specifically dyslexia. There's people saying, oh, she has to have this to be successful. Otherwise, if she's not doing these 10 things by the time she's, this age, then she'll never be reading and she'll never do this, and this will happen and this will happen, this will happen. And what I want to say is, what else happens in my future? Am I rich? Like, is she rich? Like, what else do you know about what my future is going to do? Because if you know all these things, like, please tell me so I can avoid some of the potholes. But it's hard. I have to intentionally take it and bring it back to what I know and what I understand. And that's part of my own unlearning process. If someone says she will never read because she's not on this level by third grade, I have to take that, bring it back and say, what do I know about my child? What do I know about how we learn? What do I know about education? Whatever. And then compare what they're saying against what I know, have a mini panic attack, maybe call Matt Barnes and be like, holy crap, I'm failing as a parent. Please help me. And he's like, step away from the ledge. Okay, everything's fine. And start over. But it's hard. I mean, it's a daily thing, I think, for me. I don't know about other people.
Oh my gosh, I love that you said that, and thank you for saying it. It's something I heard recently where it said, we're not going from imperfection to perfection. We are just going from perfection to perfection. And I love that, because what that's saying is we're already fine the way we are. We don't have to change who we are to become something or someone, to become this perfect thing. And when we see with educators or parents, right, it's always striving, am I doing it right? I had a parent reach out to me recently too, who I'm friends with, and she has 3 kids. And she'll say, I'm really trying, but it's hard sometimes, and, so on and so forth. And I go, you're doing fine. Like the fact that you're even asking questions, you're being conscious of your role in your kids' lives, you're being intentional, that's enough. Because the reality is, human, we make mistakes all the time, but that's what helps us grow. So it's okay. I think the problem with the system is we keep making mistakes over and over again, and they're repeated every day, to the point that now these children internalize their value society, and then they have that mental breakdown, get a backpack and go backpacking for a year and quit their corporate job because they don't know who they are anymore.
For real. Or, just become an educational consultant on LinkedIn and just make some sort of weird live show and just do the things, because what are we even doing with our lives?
Like hashtag, all the things.
I mean, I feel like I'm living these things, at 32 instead of doing them whenever I was supposed to do them. I don't know when you're supposed to do them, but I feel like I'm late.
I say in schools, they talk about that student that with like that student that's is on the right path. And I'm like, that's a very arbitrary person. This is an imaginary person that we're using.
This is an imaginary. Show me this human. Like, prove it. Where is this human? But I think I like what you said about being right. Like, am I doing the right thing? My child in education, as an educator, as a parent, as whatever, like, oh my gosh, am I doing it right? Is something that we all think all the time. And it's such crap. Like, right changes every second. I mean, right is changing as fast as the world is changing, as fast as everything is changing. So whatever was right, and right is not universal, which is another issue with education as it is today, because all the answers are universal, right? This is right, this is wrong, this is the answer, this is not. And I think that's a big thing that should be challenged. Is it right? Is it right for who? Is it right for you? Is it right for your child? Is it right for your experience? And how does that feel for you? And how does that impact people around you? These are the questions to ask, instead of, is it right? And then Googling, like, what should I be doing for my third grader? Don't do that.
Yeah. Are you talking from experience, or?
I'm talking from experience. I am talking from, being a school director, and the parents that would come in and be like, oh my gosh, my 18-month-old is not doing these 10 things. And I saw it on a blog. And I'm like, first of all, no more Googling. There will be no more Googling. But I think it's asking the same question, but just a little bit different. Not, is it right in the standards that have been set for me, but is it right in the standards or the experiences or whatever for my child, for this specific thing that's happening? Is it right? And I think right in those two contexts can both be very different.
I love that. It's also just like, does it feel right to you?
Mm-hmm.
And I think we've been also just completely conditioned about listening to our gut feeling. Like, we've all had the gut feeling. All of us have. I mean, that's just how we're made up. But how many of us listen to it? Because we're conditioned to think that sometimes what you feel is not right. And then we go to pathways, and then it doesn't feel right. And then we're maybe having addictions or doing things on the weekends to kind of get away from it, because somehow we feel better, even though we should have listened to our gut in the first place. Of what it is. And you mentioned right and wrong, and I love that, because I do talk a lot about like duality, right? We live in this world where I think we're transcending past it, which is like, oh my gosh, thank goodness. But a lot of the way we're conditioned is like, this person's good, this person's bad. Like, this is right, this is wrong. Like, this is accepted, this is not accepted. And the reality is that's really limiting, because as human beings, we all have gray areas. There is no such thing. And I know that comes from our survival instincts, right? Like the fight or fight response. We're always trying to kind of understand things in that capacity. But I think now it is that idea of like, when someone says, well, this is the way we should be doing it, I'm going, okay, but I love that perspective. And you're coming from your conditioning, your biases, your your perspective. So that may be right for you, but it may be something that I can try and work out, but it may not work for me.
Right.
And so, it's just funny because, I remember like so many times my parents will say like, oh my gosh, this person is a doctor, or like, I'm like, oh, that's really cool.
And that's it. Like, and I think, wouldn't it be easier if everything was so black and white? Wouldn't that just be easier if it was right, wrong? And I think if that were true, I feel like if that were true, we wouldn't have so many unhealthy coping strategies. We wouldn't have all of these other things that I feel like we're trying to use to supplement when we know that we're not doing something that feels right for us, but other people are telling us it's right. And then we're having to kind of cope in sometimes unhealthy ways. And I just feel like if it was only right and wrong, and there were only two answers, then why is there so much unhealthiness, happening in the world?
Yeah. I mean, this is my existential crisis every day, Chelsea. So, like, literally, I think like when I went to grad school, I felt that all the time. Like, I felt that, and I loved everyone dearly, but I did have moments where I was kind of going, like, is this aligned with your truth? Like, do you care about this, or have you been told to care about this?
Yeah.
Like, a resume is cool, but I'm talking on LinkedIn now, but you know what I mean? Like, like a resume is cool, but that's not your value. That's not who you
Right.
are.
Yeah. And I think that's huge. Like I'm going through this now in my own personal life at 32, right? With all these things and now having to take, why am I doing that? Am I doing that because I was told to do that or because I'm choosing to do that? Because I was experiencing, like, just to be totally honest, I was experiencing like anxiety and depression and all of these things. And I had to really go back and say, why? Like, what is the root of these things? And really think about my actions and what I was choosing and how that made me feel. Because, like you were saying, a lot of us are told to not trust what we feel. Like, don't worry that that makes you feel crappy when you do that. This is the right thing to do. And you do that for long enough, and suddenly you feel crappy all the time, but you're doing the right thing. And it's this place of like awfulness. And until someone says to you, like you were saying, it's okay to feel how you feel, how are we going to then align your actions with your truth? But somebody has to tell you that.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you just assume this is life.
Yeah. And a lot of people do. You know, it's quite unfortunate. I mean, I think that's where our schooling and our education comes in. I think if we're given space to actually cultivate that consciousness that's already resides in all of us, you know, and really, really align with it. And I'm not sitting here and saying conditioning and programming is not going to happen. It's going to happen.
Right.
Human
Right.
being.
Oh, yeah.
But it is that what you said, that constant questioning, that constant trying to understand. I mean, to be frank too, and I talk about this in my book as well, like I was really conditioned to believe that my value was getting married. Like that is my value in society. And now I've come to the point where I did a lot of unlearning and really understood that that's great if that happens, but that's not my value. And it doesn't matter when it happens, and it doesn't matter what age and all the stuff that people, well, there's a right time. No, there's no right time, actually. That's completely not true. And so, and if you ask me right now, like, hey, Komal, how's it going? I'm going to tell you, I'm aligned. I am like living it up. I am doing what I want to do, which is to make an impact. And like, yes, like life is great.
Yeah, right? Yeah. And I think your use of the word aligned can be so rare. And I think especially for learners and in traditional education, how often do you hear them say things like, this feels aligned for me, or this is my truth and this is how I'm doing that? I mean, it's not common language. And I think that's a big thing we talk about when we're creating trauma-informed spaces in education is, what's your common language? And how are you using that to empower these trauma-informed spaces? And I have not had this conversation with you, but I wonder, like, is there a common language that can be used inside of building consciousness in education, or what would that look like?
Yeah. Some words that come to mind for me is curiosity, connection, purpose, engagement, authenticity. You know, if I were to tell you some of those words that always come up for me, those are definitely some that come up quite often. And I do think we have people in our world, and children and young people, they're already compassionate and empathetic, right?
Right.
A lot of these things we keep, you know, and this is not to negate the curriculums and systems that are out there to try to kind of put this into school systems like compassion and empathy. But sometimes I do have to ask myself and go, what have we done that now that child is not that?
Right.
They came into this world being that.
Right.
So what happened that now we have to teach it? My question then becomes, where are the spaces to cultivate that alignment, like you said? And so that's why a lot of what I talk, this has to start young. Yeah. Because as we get older, we struggle to unlearn because it's uncomfortable. It's like trying to drive on another side of the road, right? It's uncomfortable. We don't know how to do it, and we probably don't do it well.
Yeah, no, it's not great.
And then we kind of get used to how we live, right?
Yeah.
We kind of accept it, and we kind of say, well, I wake up every morning and this is just the way it is. And it's sad, you know, and I feel for those people, because I'm going, you have so much to offer this world, and you have just been conditioned and programmed out of it, but you are so worthy. You are so
Mm-hmm.
worthy. And a lot of the times, the same people we ostracize in our society as adults, I always wonder, like, how did we ostracize them from a young age? That's the
Right.
immediate thing
Right.
I think
Yeah.
about. What have we done that now we don't even acknowledge you in society?
Mm-hmm.
You were a young person at one point who was a
Right.
learner, who was curious, who was connected, and something happened
Right. Or didn't happen,
or didn't happen.
and now that's your experience. And I mean, I don't know. The whole concept of it is just like the most exciting thing ever. And starting to see the conversation take place
Yeah.
in a bigger way is so exciting for me to be able to think that there might really be some traction coming to this concept of awareness and alignment and consciousness inside of a larger education system,
Yeah.
because it's world changing. And that, because, and not because of we're doing anything, like we said, we don't know the future of education, but rather we're giving the power back to the learner, back to the student, and giving them a seat at the table, or giving them the table. Like, just give them the whole table.
Build the table while we're at
You
it.
can have it. You can just have it. It doesn't even need to be a table. You can have whatever you want. Like, just do it. But because I've struggled with it personally. Like, so my youngest, like I said, has dyslexia, and she was going to a school. We did a lot of different things to support her, because we were being told, even in what I know, that there is one way to support her. So we were doing those things. And what I saw of that was sadness, fear, frustration, like a hatred of learning, like just devoid of everything. And she is a unicorn and rainbows kid, right? Everything is beautiful all the time, and she's
Yeah.
bouncing and unicorns and rainbows. And I would meet with the school and say, listen, she's crying before she goes to school, she's having anxiety attacks, this is not my child, like, she's having all of these things. What are we going to do? And their answer was, and because this is what they know, the answer was, we're just going to keep pushing through it. Right? We're just going to keep, this is what she needs. We don't want her to quit now because she needs this. This is important. This is whatever. And that's hard. That's hard to hear from someone that you feel like knows more than you, right? In this sense, my dyslexia experience is limited. So when someone who has that experience says, yes, your child's having panic attacks, yes, they're having anxiety, yes, they're crying at school, yes, yes.
Yeah.
However, this is more important than the experience of your child. That's really hard. And it was hard for me to finally say, that's enough. Like, this is enough. We can't do that. This is not okay. I'm going to put my child first. And if she doesn't read ever, like, at least she's happy. Okay.
But like, honestly, she's going to be great.
So I think that is kind of my story of what does it look like to humanize education? Like, are we humanizing it? And that's a big thing that you and I have a conversation about, is, are we humanizing the system?
Yeah.
And what does that look like?
And, and there's so many barriers, right? And I think you and I already know them, but when you perpetuate standardized testing, that in itself is going to be the evaluation metrics that you're going to constantly see. Then you're putting kids by age groups into classrooms.
Right.
And somehow saying they need to read by this reading. Like, what? Like, people read at different times. Like, should you encourage reading for your child? Sure, absolutely. But do you have to encourage a certain pace? No, you actually don't. Because they do it a different way. If someone has dyslexia or something, it's going to take longer, and it's okay. But we, unfortunately, we're in a pressure cooker. It's like, by May, you need to teach these 8 units. So make it happen. And from there, we see all the detrimental effects that we have on kids. And, it's funny. When you watch movies and you see all the kids, whenever they have a school scene, you have all the kids in rows looking at their teacher like this, waiting for the bell to ring. And I'm going, how have we normalized that this is like normal?
This is okay. This is what we want our kids to experience.
Like, this is where
I don't want to do it, but it's fine if our kids do it.
Yeah, like, we all went through it. we all went through it. And it's like, no, this is like,
Mm-hmm.
that is so unreal that that's even a thing that's happening to
Yeah.
children. Um, but yeah, I mean, maybe the homeschooling and the unlearning people got it right from the beginning.
Right? I mean, this whole unschooling concept. I mean, that's what if we were to title what I'm doing with my girls now, it's unschooling. And it's really breaking that down. And we're actually going to do an interview with my oldest on one of these and have her talk about what her day looks like and how she does it and
Amazing.
and I have no idea what she's going to say. She could say some crazy things. But I'm like, it's fine. It's all fine. What could go wrong? That might be the show where things do go wrong. Put an 11-year-old on here.
So powerful because we need to hear from the young people who are like, it's funny. I was in a meeting earlier today and we were like, where are the young people? Like, they need to be here. Like, we need to have them in the conversation. But then we were also saying is that we limit, at least what I saw a lot of times with my students, and I've taught middle school, so like 10, 11-year-olds, they had no choice at school. And then they had no choice at home.
Right. Yeah.
How do you expect that person, that child, to become an activist when they get older?
Mm-hmm.
Honestly.
Yeah.
And people saying, speak up, and, we're all a collective and we're community. I'm like, we have not been taught about interconnectedness growing up. We have talked about individuality, separation. Mm-hmm. It's a competitive race. It's about what you can tell people about your job title, where you went to school, your alma mater. Right. That's what matters. And it's not who you are as a human being. So I mean, it's unfortunate, but then we're sitting here and we're seeing in the past year how people have had to come together and go, we have been too siloed for too long and we have stopped caring about other people. And so that is something I think about a lot too, is if we want that connection in our society in the future, well, we better be bringing connection into our education system so people feel more aligned to each other.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, yes, all of that. Just preach. Just yes.
Done.
I agree with all the things you said. Let's do it. Salty says, why does it seem fair that we decide that we're going to teach a child but don't involve the children in the process? Yeah. I mean, that's back to the whole ego of the educator. Like, why are we making all the decisions for this child and how are they involved in it and all those things? And I think, so like, if you were to take all of this really giant conversation that we just had in your giant book and you were to boil it down into, please walk away with this, what would that look like?
Yeah. Oh, wow. I would just say, right, it's a push, but I will just say, I think we focus too much on mastering the external world and materializing success as an association of who we are in this world and our happiness. And I think it's time that we start seeing the human and the humanity in someone and cultivating that so we can have a more purposeful and beautiful society.
Ta-da! Okay, so tell us about your pre-launch, about all of that, and where to find you and all of those things. That's very important. Ready, set,
go. The first thing I would say is connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm always happy to connect and chat if that's something you're interested in and want to hear more about my book. Always happy to do that. I am launching my pre-sales for my book this Friday, which is crazy.
Exciting.
It's super exciting. So anyone who contributes, you get part of my authors community, you get acknowledged in the book, you get a bunch of perks, and also get to give me feedback on my content before I publish in August. So all the good things. And I will be sharing posts on my LinkedIn. I'll also put the link in my bio so you can do that, but it'll be on Friday at noon PST time. So that's when I'm doing my pre-launch and I'm super excited.
I'm so excited. I'm like, I feel like I've been waiting for this for so long and now it's finally coming.
Yes, I always say, I'm like, I'm just moving away the dirt for the first seed to be planted. That's how I see it,
Yeah, I'm so excited. Okay, hang on. What is the best way to motivate children to learn and thrive?
My perspective and my opinion, and again, I don't know every child, you don't need to motivate them. They already know how to learn and thrive. Just encourage what's already within them.
Inquiry based. I mean, that's kind of the concept of what are they interested in? And if they're not motivated or interested, then they're not interested. So how can you shift that to something else? And that's,
Yeah.
of course, easier in some settings than it is in others, but it's fine.
Yeah. You know, figure it out with each human and each person. But hey, again, we're all perfect just the way we are. So just growth and development. We got this.
We totally got this.
Totally
We
got
totally have this. So be sure, everyone, to connect and check out the book that may or may not be titled Bringing Consciousness to Education by the time that it finally releases. It's like a party, like a gender reveal where you're like, oh.
Yes.
There are so many really amazing people who have been interviewed for the book, which is what I love about it, because it's not just here's what I think and here's why I think and here's what you should do. It's how are we asking the right questions? And so you had said to me, like, the genre of your book is something.
I think it's just nonfiction, big idea, kind of like thought leadership.
No, there was something like when we were talking about writing a book and you had said it's not a self-help book. It's not a how-to book. It's a
vision. It's a vision for the future.
Yes. Yes.
And if
I
you
love
want to see who I interviewed, I'll send Chelsea the link too if she wants to post it. But it's just my website, thekomalshah.com, and you can see all the people that I've interviewed if you're interested of kind of seeing who are the contributors.
There's some really great people on there. So, okay. So this is all hosted by Restream, which is really cool because I get to stream it on Twitch and LinkedIn and Facebook and YouTube and all the different places all at one time because I wouldn't be able to keep up with that. So yay for people that can. So that is how that happens. Definitely connect, check out the book, watch that go. And then I will be interviewing my 11-year-old, so you'll want to follow me and make sure that you're around for that because who knows what kind of shenanigans will come out of that situation. And I have almost convinced Matt Barnes to do that with me. So it'd be like me and Matt Barnes and my 11-year-old, which could be just super interesting. So
I love it.
Thank you guys so much for hanging out. Thank you for sharing all of your beauty and loveliness. And I think you're an amazing human. And I'm excited for your book. So we're very excited. And we will see you guys next time on What Could Go Wrong.
Go wrong.